4,
I start talking.
3.
I think.
Hello and welcome again to Conversations in Authenticity. I'm Dr. Walter Bro.
And I'm Andrea Reese.
And today we're going to talk to you about being authentic within family settings and personal relationships. Andrea.
Yes.
When you think about authenticity, what comes to your mind when you think about personal relationships and authentic self?
Well, it depends. If you're talking about the family, I think it's so difficult for some people to kind of transition to their authentic self if their authentic self isn't what their family thinks they are or thinks they've raised them to be or thinks that they should be. I think there's another level of pressure when it's the family because they've, especially if you've been birthed through that, they've seen you come through all the developmental stages and actually embracing who you've become outside of something that they directly produced or, have directly been a part of. It's difficult for a lot of families and a lot of people. And so having the courage in that setting is, I think, one of the most difficult.
That's interesting because when you talk about being authentic within a family setting, there is that piece of, does your family recognize who you have become moment by moment, year by year, throughout your developmental stages? Or does your family have a perception of who they want you to be, who you should be as a member of that group? And then that brings up the question for me, what does it mean to be authentic as a group member? Or what does it mean to be authentic in general? Does it have a component of being a group member, and should we consider who we are as part of that group authentically when we're part of the family and be a different self?
Yes, I don't think it's necessarily being a different self, but I think the awareness of being who you are, like you said it perfectly, being who you are in relation to that group. So if my family is a completely different type of group than who I am as a person, the dynamic that I bring to this group now is my purpose in this group. If the way I think, the way that I process information, the way that I do things is completely different, it becomes my responsibility to bring that dynamic to this group now, and to me to be assured in it and introduce it in a way to where, to where, okay, I'm family, I'm blood, I'm this is not bad. Introduce that, and that takes a certain amount of courage because a lot of times if, like you said, if they haven't raised you this way or it's not something that they produced or that they feel should be there, then they're gonna, the egos and all that stuff is just gonna combat against it.
Sure.
So
no, that's good. So I mean, part of it is when you say we have a responsibility to bring that self to this group, it really helps the group grow. So I think about that being kind of like love. I mean, really being selfless and extending the greater good beyond self. So if I think I love my family, part of my responsibility is to be authentic in who I am with my family. So by that modeling of my true self, they can have the opportunity to grow and expand more of who they are.
Because a lot of times, like we're talking about authenticity, and we kind of talked about some percentages. You said 100% of people at some point are inauthentic.
Right.
And so I don't necessarily believe 100% are inauthentic, but I think at some point it varies. But that big number means that 9 times out of 10, if you come to this place of self-awareness to where you're really embracing authenticity and working towards it constantly, that percentage means that probably somebody in your family is not.
Sure.
They have not come to that level. They might not even understand how to get to that level of self-awareness, authenticity, trueness, or love, or all of that stuff. All their projections is all that they see. So it now becomes, a kind of your responsibility to help free them, because you're really free to be able to make that decision to be who you are. So if you truly do love your family, or you truly do love these people that are connected to you, does that mean that you allow them to remain bound?
Wow. And so at some level I hear you're saying that we have the responsibility to be ourselves, and it helps liberate them. What do you think about the piece that people might have a choice, and making the choice not to be authentic can be an authentic choice?
I don't think so. I don't think that's an authentic choice. I think that's a choice fueled by fear.
Okay.
I think if I choose to be inauthentic, then I'm choosing to remain in a place that is safe, and because I am afraid to come outside of that.
So
that's what I think.
No, I mean, I think that's good, because in being safe and being in a place of fear and catering to that state, that emotion, that reality, I'm thinking that might be an authentic awareness or authentic moment where we could then again have the opportunity to liberate ourselves from that fear. If I can say authentically, I'm in fear, I'm not being authentic because of this or that, if I can be honest with myself at that very level, then I have the opportunity, again, the same mechanism, to choose to be a greater self, a higher self. But I do wonder about that piece where clients come in. Or let's leave it with family, where you see that family member who is struggling with ego, they're struggling with fear, they're really not trusting self, and they don't really bring a true self to the relationship. I see it as a challenge to liberate them if they're not willing to be liberated.
I think it's a transition.
Okay.
I think what that is, I think that's very positive because it's necessary. Nobody's going to go from completely shut down in Alcatraz, is what I'm visioning right now, to, the wide open fields over here in Georgia somewhere. That's a big transition. So somewhere, as you're traveling through those two places, you have to come to places, well, look, this is where I am right now. I'm afraid to make that decision in the boardroom. I'm afraid to do this. When I recognize that I am, that's not necessarily making a decision to be inauthentic. I view it as acceptance of what is, so that I can change it. So I think in essence, it's a decision to work towards being more authentic. That I'm making the decision to start.
So authenticity is a spectrum. It's not necessarily a moment, here I am authentic. I'm always in a state of being or becoming. I like that.
Kind of like self-actualization.
Yes.
We're always at different levels of self-actualization. When I first entered this program, I felt like I was very self-aware and I was at a certain level of self-actualization. But as I progressed through the program, through the academic experience and through the personal experience of digging into myself and working on myself, I graduated to different levels of self-actualization to the point where I can try to help other people transition with me or transition along that spectrum. So it's always different levels, and it's very instrumental the times that we come to these levels, because at some point you might have needed to be in a certain place of fear. Or certain, it was instrumental in keeping you safe, but as you come to different levels of courage, you're able to progress on that spectrum.
And so just juxtaposing those two words, fear and then courage, it's really about living in the heart or living in a place where it's absent of true emotion or true heart, true self. Let's go back to talking about family liberating, because I think a lot of people have that perception about, I have a family member, they're somewhere, they might be being authentic to themselves in that fear, but at some level I want to liberate them and I feel like a failure if I can't. I feel like I have a responsibility to change them at some level. What are your thoughts about that struggle and the fact that we can be ourselves and we can be authentic and we can show our true selves to people, and that sometimes we still might be rejected, and sometimes people will still make the choice not to receive us in a more authentic place? What are your thoughts about that for people in general, and I think specifically for becoming counselors?
I think that challenging our own fear is it takes so much courage, and I keep saying this because I think it's so important in that respect. Outside of just my counseling courses, I was in the College of Servant Leadership, and I took a class on coaching, Dr. Ron King from the Pastoral Institute. And I learned so much about giving them their power of choice, because coaching as a profession doesn't really go into your background. It kind of is, okay, what do you want to do from today forward? And so as a counselor, having to practice that, it was so difficult not to try to figure out why and take on their problem, fix it, and then give it back to them in a more manageable state for who I believe that they are capable of dealing with it.
Right.
And it made me transition to giving them the power to change their stuff, to believe that they are able to create, that they are capable, that they are competent, no matter what everything else would try to say. And so in practicing doing that, I have to take away the fear. I have to challenge my own fear of that they're able to do it. So I have to be confident in my family member, that they are able to. I have to give them that power so that if they fail, I don't feel personally hit by it as a counselor, as a family member, as a sister, as a future mother, aunt, anything. I can't take on their failure because I believe in them enough that they are able to do this. And so instead of me taking it personally, I'm able to encourage them.
Right.
I'm able to coach them. I'm able to be my authentic self and give them what I have and not be wounded.
And it really sounds like, from what you said earlier, that you're able to see that they have made a choice in their power, their use of will. That's not necessarily a failure, but really their level of authenticity, where they're at in that moment in that progression. And I think that's really important to see, because at some level, we have to be patient with people in their process of becoming, just as much as it's taken a process for us to become who we are. And I think that's really important, because what I see for counselors coming into the program, a lot of times, there's a need to work on some past issue. Usually it has to do with a family member. And usually it has to do with being more authentic. And I think it's wonderful, as we talk about this, to know how much authenticity has to do with dealing with self. And the more you understand self, the more you're able to relate to other people, and the more you're able to give a better self, a healthier self to other people too.
I also think that a big portion for families is forgiveness. As we're talking about it, it just really, that's a common theme. Like you said, as counselors come into the program, you always have to deal with something from family. Right. And generally, it has to do with forgiveness of some sort, of some type, holding on to that unforgiveness and that fear of the repeat of whatever created that unforgiveness. And, forgiving people for not being able to facilitate that, forgiving people for being who they are, forgiving, atrocities, forgiving everything. And I think that's another part of being authentic, is being able to confront your fear about whatever happened, or confront your feelings or your anger or your guilt, or being able to confront your own feelings and being okay with that enough to forgive, so that you can be authentic. Because unforgiveness can really just shoot your authenticity. It can just really jack it up, because now I'm so clouded by everything that's in my face. I'm so, with your family, it's no like, oh, we met 4 years ago, we had a great experience once a week, let's go out and let's go do, I'm going to do these great wonderful things, we're going to meet again. No, family has a long continuum through all different levels of growth, all types of things have happened. So being able to forgive, and as those moments progress, frees you to be authentic. Because if not, unforgiveness, I really believe unforgiveness can really choke it.
And I love the part where you say forgiving people for being who they are. I think that's the biggest sign to me that fear is really a sign of the ego's presence. And the fact that one can be so arrogant not to accept people for who they are. A lot of times it's our own fear of being received as our authentic self. And when you talk about forgiveness, I always think about forgiveness being the ability to look back with a more mature mind. When things happen, we see it at the level we are, but as we progress in time in the process, we mature, and we can go back and look at things and see with a more mature mind with different perspective, and to trust ourselves in that moment to see it for what it is and let it go. I think that's wonderful. Well, I think we've covered a lot, especially around family and personal relationships, because a lot of this extends into families of friends.
Yes.
In the groups that we surround ourselves with. Marriages, definitely. All those. Children and parent-child relationships, definitely. Any other thoughts or anything before we head out?
Not that I can think of.
All right. Well, it's been great talking to you as usual.
You as well.
I look forward to talking more about authenticity with you.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us here on our Conversations on Authenticity. I'm Andrea Reese.
And I'm Dr. Walter Bro.
And we look forward to seeing you again. You have a great day, and keep tuned in to CSU TV.